In the dusty village of Amoke, a place wrapped in silence and secrets, lived a girl named Zena. She was no beauty queen, just an ordinary girl with cracked heels, uneven braids, and dreams no one cared to hear. Her stepmother, Mama Neka, often said she was too quiet to matter and too plain to be chosen. But Zena's hands, her hands could make magic in a pot. It was market day. The village was preparing for the chief's anniversary, and everyone who mattered was busy. Zena wasn't invited to help. She wasn't even allowed near the palace kitchen. Still, something in her chest stirred that morning as she stared at the tiny dry fish and leftover pepper in their clay bowl. Something whispered, "Cook," and so she did. She ground the pepper with trembling hands. She sliced onions through blurred eyes. She stirred with hope and salt and a quiet kind of rebellion. The firewood crackled like it knew a secret. By the time the soup was done, the aroma danced through the wind like a spirit on a mission. Zena didn't know what possessed her to place the pot outside, just at the corner where the palace guards often passed. She only sat, watching it steam, wiping sweat from her brow, and wondering if food made from scraps could mean anything to anyone but herself. She didn't know the prince was passing. She didn't know he hadn't eaten all day. She didn't know he would taste it. And she definitely didn't know what that single spoon would start. The moment Prince Toba tasted the soup, something shifted in his spirit. He had only meant to stop by the roadside to fix his sandal strap, but the smell caught him like a spell. His guards had warned him not to eat food from strangers, especially not from uncovered pots by village corners. But the aroma silenced their words. It wasn't just food, it was truth, it was comfort. It was a memory of something he didn't even know he had forgotten. He dipped his fingers into the thick, peppery broth, and his eyes closed before the swallow even touched his tongue. Then he asked just one question: who made this? But there was no answer. Zena had already slipped away, not out of fear, but out of habit. She was used to being invisible. She didn't know a prince had noticed her pot. She didn't see the royal guards sniffing the air, carrying the pot like treasure back to the palace. She didn't hear the whispers that followed, how the chef was summoned, accused, then forgiven when he admitted the soup wasn't his doing. Prince Toba couldn't sleep that night, not because the soup was good, but because it was unforgettable. His heart itched with longing, not for the girl, whom he hadn't even seen, but for the mystery. The soup held a soul, a message, and he needed to know who sent it. The next morning, royal messengers were sent across Amoke village. They carried only one strange request. The girl who cooked the soup near the western path, let her come forward. The prince requests her name. And just like that, Zena's pot of soup, cooked from leftovers and loneliness, became the key to a door she never dreamed existed. But behind that door, something dangerous also waited. Zena was still scrubbing the wooden mortar behind Mama Neka's hut when she heard the whispers. "The prince is looking for a girl, a soup maker," one woman said, balancing a basket of yams on her head. "They say she cooked magic into the soup," another laughed. "She must be a witch." Mama Neka, sitting under the mango tree with her usual gossip circle, scoffed. "What nonsense! A whole prince searching for a cook. Must be some palace trick." But her heart skipped a beat. Because only one girl in her house had been near a pot that morning, and Mama Neka knew she hadn't given Zena permission to cook. Not for anyone, not for herself. Later that afternoon, a royal guard came knocking. He was tall, silent, and dressed in white and gold. He didn't greet, he didn't smile. He simply asked, "Who made the soup by the western road?" The entire compound froze. Before Zena could speak, her stepsister Tari stepped forward, bowing slightly, her voice syrupy and sweet. "It was me, sir," she lied. "I cook for the family, always have." Mama Neka's eyes darted between Zena and Tari. She said nothing. She only nodded slowly, approving the lie like it was truth. Zena stood there, a rag still in her hand, her lips trembling, but silence was her companion. It always had been. The guard bowed slightly and Tari to prepare to follow him to the palace the next morning. And just like that, someone else was wearing her story. But fate is like fire. It can't stay hidden under dry leaves for long. Because while Tari was choosing a royal dress for a life that wasn't hers, Zena was stirring a second pot, one that would soon stir up the entire kingdom. Zena didn't sleep that night. While Tari twirled before a broken mirror in Mama Neka's wrapper, Practicing her palace curtsy, Zena sat by the fire again. The ache in her chest burned hotter than the flames. She didn't want praise. She didn't even care about meeting a prince. She only wanted the truth to breathe. So she did what only she knew how to do. She cooked. But this time, her hands moved with something deeper. Not hope, not joy, but justice. She added the same ingredients: dried fish, crushed pepper, a pinch of salt, but the spirit in the pot was different. It was quiet, unforgiving, focused. And once the soup was ready, she poured it into a small clay pot, wrapped it with her old scarf, and placed it gently at the door. Not for the prince, not for the palace. This one was for Mama Chimdi, the blind widow who always gave Zena words when no one else gave her food. If anyone deserved to taste the truth, it was her. But what Zena didn't know was that Mama Chimdi's son worked in the palace. He was the prince's most trusted food taster, his tongue sharper than a knife, trained to detect poison, salt imbalance, and lies disguised as flavor. That evening, he returned home after a long day of tasteless palace food. When he saw the pot, he almost didn't taste it until the aroma stopped him. One sip and he froze. "Ma, who brought this?" "Zena, my daughter," the old woman smiled. She said it's nothing special. But the son's eyes widened. He had tasted this soup before, just once, in the prince's bowl a week ago. And just like that, Zena's second pot, meant to heal a widow's evening, became the final spark in a royal fire that was about to burn through every lie. Dapo, the royal food taster, had been raised with a gift most people didn't understand. He could not read or write like the palace scribes, but his tongue could tell the story of any soup, from the firewood used to the hands that stirred it. To Prince Toba, Dapo's taste was more trusted than 100 words. That's why he had been chosen to test every meal before it touched royal lips. So when he sipped the soup in his mother's hut, and his tongue remembered the whisper of crayfish, the ghost of dried ugu leaves, and the exact peppery sorrow he'd tasted a week ago, he didn't question it. He knew this was the same girl, the real girl. He left Mama Chimdi's house before his fufu cooled. By sunrise, Dapo stood before the prince in his private garden. No crown, no guards, just two men, and the truth between them. "I found the cook," he said. Prince Toba looked up sharply. "You're sure?" "There's something you need to taste again," Dapo replied. Later that day, Prince Toba sat before a steaming bowl of soup, simple, plain, served in a chipped clay pot with no gold, no lace. But the moment he dipped in, his heart stirred like it had that day on the roadside. This was the soup. This was the soul he had tasted. But if this wasn't Tari's doing, then who had lied? The prince rose slowly, his face unreadable. And when the palace chef entered with a long guest list of noble cooks and scheduled performances for the upcoming anniversary banquet, Toba tore it in half. "Cancel everything," he said. "The banquet will begin only when I find the girl behind this bowl." The palace grew quiet, because everyone knew the prince never made empty promises. And outside the walls, in a forgotten corner of the village, the girl with cracked heels and golden hands had no idea that royalty was now chasing her truth. Tari arrived at the palace draped in borrowed elegance. Her gel was tied high, her wrapper freshly ironed, and her smile rehearsed. She walked like royalty, even though her heart was pounding like a borrowed drum. Mama Neka had warned her, "Just keep saying you made the soup. Don't overtalk, and don't let your pride finish you." But Tari had never known how to stop once attention found her. So when the palace stewards welcomed her with a feast, when maids bowed and called her the chosen cook, and when the prince's advisors smiled politely as she spoke, Tari believed the lie could last. They asked her to cook again. She agreed. She danced into the palace kitchen like a queen, but her fingers fumbled the pepper. She couldn't tell dry crayfish from ginger. She oversalted the stock and nearly burned the agusi. The chef watched in silence. He didn't interrupt. He simply noted everything she touched and everything she didn't know. Still, when she finished, the bowl was carried to the prince, as tradition demanded. Toba tasted it. He did not speak. He simply pushed the bowl away, gently, as though it had offended his spirit. "This isn't her," he said softly. His advisors looked confused. "But she claimed." "I said this is not her," the prince repeated, rising to his feet. Tari, still waiting in the kitchen, adjusted her wrapper and began humming a love song she thought fitting for a future princess. But outside the kitchen, her name had already started to fade. Because when truth walks into a room, lies begin to sweat. And far away, in the same wrapper she wore to fetch firewood, Zena was once again stirring a pot, not knowing the palace was no longer searching, it was coming. They didn't come with drums. They didn't ride in with trumpets or gold-coated horses like during royal visits. No, this time, the palace entered Amoke quietly, like a whisper traveling through trees. 3 guards, 1 royal steward, and Dapo, the prince's food taster, leading the way on foot. By the time they reached Mama Chimdi's compound, the old woman was already seated on her wooden stool, like she knew they were coming. Her smile was calm, and her eyes, though blind, sparkled with awareness. "You're not here for me," she said gently. "You're here for Zena." The guards exchanged glances. Dapo stepped forward. "Where can we find her?" Mama Chimdi didn't point. She simply called out, "Zena, child, your time has come." There she was, barefoot. Ash on her wrapper, her fingers stained from peeling cocoyam. She hadn't combed her hair that day. She hadn't even washed her face. But when Dapo looked at her, he nodded. "Yes, it's her." Zena stepped back, fear clouding her eyes. "I didn't do anything wrong," she whispered. "We know," Dapo replied, "and that's exactly why the prince wants to see you." The village watched from behind cracked doors and raffia curtains. Some women shook their heads. Others whispered old prophecies. Mama Nika, hearing the footsteps pass her compound, ran to the backyard, her wrapper half-tied. "Zena," she hissed, "where are you going?" But Zena didn't answer. Because for the first time in her life, silence was no longer her shield, it was her entrance. She followed the palace men without shoes, without preparation, without knowing that each step was rewriting her story. And behind her, the scent of truth still lingered in every path she had walked. The palace gates opened slowly, not with the usual fanfare, but with a kind of cautious curiosity. Zena walked through them barefoot, her head bowed, her wrapper dusty, her heart pounding like a talking drum in a storm. The guards didn't speak, the servants didn't whisper, but the silence shouted, "Who is this girl? Why is she not dressed? Is this the one the prince is waiting for?" Prince Toba stood at the center of the courtyard, his eyes fixed on her. Not because she was beautiful, she wasn't by royal standards, not because she smiled, she didn't, but because something about her presence pulled at him. She didn't beg, she didn't boast, she just stood. "Are you the one who made that soup?" he asked plainly. Zena nodded slowly. "Yes, but I didn't know it would matter." A murmur ran through the courtyard. The chef leaned in from the shadows. The queen mother, who had been watching from behind a curtain, stepped out. "Child," she said gently, "do you know what you've stirred?" Zena looked down. "I was just cooking. That's all I've ever done." Prince Toba stepped closer. "Can you make it again? Right now? From scratch? With what we give you?" Zena hesitated, not because she was afraid, but because she knew the truth. That kind of soup needed more than ingredients. Still, she nodded. Within minutes, the palace kitchen became hers. The chef stood back. The stewards leaned in. The air grew still as she began. No apron, no gloves, no helpers. Just Zena, a fire, and a pot. And as the scent began to rise again, weaving through royal halls and memories, everyone in that palace understood. She hadn't entered by force. The palace had opened itself for her. Tari was in the guest chamber, reclining on silk she had never touched before, when she smelled it. That scent. That same haunting aroma. She sat up sharply, her fingers tightening around her goblet of spiced palm wine. She knew that smell. It wasn't hers. It had never been hers. She rushed to the balcony, peered over the palace courtyard, and what she saw nearly choked her. Zena, in the royal kitchen, surrounded by nobles and guards, stirring with ease, drawing every eye and nose toward her like a spell. Tari's heart dropped. "Why is she here?" she whispered to herself. The queen mother walked by the corridor and paused when she saw Tari. "Your food was interesting," she said politely, but there was no warmth in her voice, only courtesy. Thin, sharp courtesy. Tari tried to smile. "Yes, I made that from scratch." The queen mother turned her head slightly. Then how strange that today's soup smells exactly like the prince's favorite, yet nothing like what you gave us." Tari's smile twitched. Downstairs, the soup was done. Prince Toba lifted a spoon, closed his eyes, and tasted the truth once again. And just like before, his heart recognized it. Not the flavor, but the soul. He opened his eyes and looked at Zena. "You're the one. You've always been the one." The royal chef clapped. The guards nodded. Dapo smiled silently in the corner. Upstairs, Tari paced the floor like a trapped lizard. She knew what was coming. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon, because lies, like thin fabric, always tear in the wind. And downstairs, Zena had just been offered something bigger than recognition, a place at the table. But she had no idea that not everyone at that table wanted her there. The soup had spoken, but the Queen Mother still needed to listen for something deeper. She had ruled beside kings, seen daughters of generals and nobles grovel for crowns, and she knew one thing for certain: gifts can be dangerous when placed in the wrong hands. So, while the palace praised Zena, and the prince smiled like a man who had found something he didn't know he was looking for, the Queen Mother ordered quietly, "Bring her to me, alone." Zena entered the queen's private chamber slowly. No shoes, same wrapper, same quiet eyes. The room was draped in gold, but it was the woman at the center who made it heavy. The Queen Mother sat like a mountain, ancient, elegant, unmoved. "Sit, child." Zena obeyed. "Tell me the truth. Why did you cook that soup that day?" Zena looked down. "Because I was hungry, not for food, for peace." The queen's brow lifted. "And if I told you the prince wants to place you in his court, not as a cook, but as something more, what would you say?" Zena's eyes widened. "Me?" The queen leaned in, her voice lower now. "Do not mistake soup for destiny, my child. There are women in this palace who would poison 10 pots just to taste power." Zena swallowed. "I only want to cook. That's all I know." The Queen Mother studied her, her plainness, her honesty, her silence. Then she nodded once. "Tomorrow, you'll serve the soup at the royal banquet. One bowl will go to the prince, one will go to me, one to the nobles, and one to the girl who claimed she made it first." Zena looked up. "Tari?" The queen nodded. "Yes, let the pot speak again. Let the truth rise." Outside, the palace was being decorated for the grand feast. Inside, one woman stirred jealousy, one stirred faith, and one stirred a test that would either lift Zena or bury her forever. The sun rose over Amoke with a strange quietness, as if even the earth knew that this day would decide something. The royal banquet hall glowed. Silks hung from the ceilings, drummers tuned their talking drums, dancers rehearsed quietly in the courtyard. And in the center of it all stood Zena, barefoot again, but steady. She had cooked the soup herself, every step watched by the Queen Mother's guards. No one else touched it. No one dared. 4 bowls, 4 fates, 1 truth. The prince sat at the head of the table, regal yet calm, eyes only on Zena. His nobles gathered, whispering, guessing. Mama Neka and Tari had been allowed into the hall. Tari seated close to the nobles, still wearing her pride like perfume. The Queen Mother lifted her hand. Servants moved like shadows. Each of the 4 bowls was placed with precision. One before the prince, one before the Queen Mother, one before the Council of Elders, and one, deliberately, in front of Tari. Tari blinked, her hands trembled slightly, but she couldn't back down now. "Eat," the Queen Mother said softly, her voice wrapping the hall in silence. Zena stood aside, watching. The prince tasted first. His eyes closed slowly, like someone returning to a familiar place. The Queen Mother followed, nodding slightly with the weight of certainty. The council murmured amongst themselves. Praise. Wonder. Recognition. Then Tari lifted her spoon. She tasted and choked. Not from poison, not from heat, but from truth. That taste, the one she had lied about, claimed as hers, defended with flair, it tasted nothing like her hands, nothing like her lies. It was foreign, perfect, and pure. And in that moment, all her words collapsed. She's the one, Tari whispered, not out of guilt, but out of collapse. She made it. I only lied because... But no one waited for her to finish. The Queen Mother rose. Zena, she said gently, this palace has tasted your soul, and now it will carry your name. And just like that, the girl who had been silenced in her own home became the most spoken name in the kingdom. From the moment Zena's name left the Queen Mother's lips, the air in the banquet hall changed. There was applause, yes, nods of approval. The prince himself smiled, not just with his lips, but with something deeper in his eyes. Yet behind the celebration, in the quiet corners of the room, something colder began to stir. Not everyone claps because they're happy. Some clap to cover envy. As Zena was led to a seat beside the Queen Mother, a seat meant for royalty, not cooks, the noble women exchanged glances. Daughters of chiefs, nieces of governors, cousins of ambassadors, all of them had come dressed in gold and silk to impress the prince. Yet it was this barefoot girl with ash-stained fingers who now sat in the light. And so that night, while the palace praised her, the plotting began. In a small chamber near the east wing, 3 noblewomen gathered in whispers. "A cook today, a queen tomorrow," one sneered. "He looked at her like he'd already chosen," another added. "We cannot let that happen. Our families didn't send us here to lose to firewood and fish." They planned quickly. A rumor, a little dirt, maybe an accusation. Something simple but dangerous, like witchcraft or manipulation or forbidden herbs hidden in the soup. But they weren't the only ones planning. Down the hall, Mama Neka sat with Tari, still fuming from the public disgrace. "You failed," she hissed. Tari's eyes brimmed with bitter tears. "It was just soup. How did it become a crown?" Mama Neka leaned forward. "If we can't wear the crown, we'll crack it before she can." And just like that, Zena's rising sun cast new shadows, longer, darker, sharper. Because in palaces, praise is never just praise. It's a spotlight, and every spotlight attracts its own enemies. It began with a single whisper. By dawn, it had become a sentence. By midday, it was a scandal. There's something strange in that girl's soup. It's too good to be natural. She doesn't even come from a cooking lineage. Where did she learn such taste? Zena woke to stares. Polite ones, curious ones, sharp ones. The kind that sliced deeper than knives but wore smiles like silk. At first, she ignored them. She focused on cleaning the palace kitchen. She helped the maids without complaint. She served the Queen Mother tea without blinking. But the air had shifted. She could feel it. And then, the Queen's personal maid was found trembling in the hallway, clutching her stomach and vomiting uncontrollably. She had only tasted a spoon from the same pot Zena had prepared earlier that morning. Just one spoon. The physician was called. The kitchen was sealed. The pot was dragged into the courtyard like a crime scene. The noblewomen who had started the whispers now stood boldly behind the Queen Mother, shaking their heads with well-rehearsed shock. "We warned you," one of them said. "No one stirs that kind of magic without something hidden in their hands." Zena stood frozen. "I didn't poison anything," she whispered. But the whispers didn't stop. The Queen Mother looked down at her, unreadable. And then the final blow came. Mama Neka stepped forward from the crowd, her voice trembling just enough to sound sincere. "I raised that girl. I'm not saying she's evil, but she's always been odd." Even Tari stayed silent. Zena looked around, surrounded by luxury and judgment. All eyes, no friends. And just like that, the very hands that had lifted her were now holding stones. But what they didn't know was that the pot had not only been stirred by her hands, but watched by someone else. Someone who had seen everything. And he was done being silent. The courtyard buzzed with tension. Maids stood in corners whispering. Guards tightened their grips on their spears. Zena stood alone, shaking but still upright, like a tree in dry season that refused to fall. The poisoned maid lay on a woven mat, her lips pale, her hands cold. The nobles were already nodding among themselves, satisfied. The trap had worked. The spotlight that had once honored Zena now burned with suspicion. Then the Queen Mother raised her voice. "Until we uncover the truth, the girl is to be confined. Strip her of kitchen duties. She is not to stir another pot." Gasps filled the air. Zena's heart sank. Her hands trembled. But just as the guard stepped forward, "No." The voice came from the far end of the courtyard. Calm, commanding, clear. Every head turned. Prince Toba stepped forward. Not in ceremony robes, not with a crown, just in plain white like the truth he came to speak. "No one touches her." The guards paused. Even the Queen Mother looked up sharply. Toba walked to the center and stood beside Zena, his eyes fierce and unwavering. "She cooked that soup under direct royal supervision. I tasted it myself before the maid did. So did Dapo. So did my own mother. If there was poison, we'd all be on that mat." The Queen Mother narrowed her eyes. "Then how do you explain this?" Toba turned to the physician. "What made the maid sick?" The physician stuttered. "I haven't confirmed. It may have been from something she ate earlier. The symptoms don't match poisoning." Toba looked at the crowd, his voice rising just enough. "Then no one accuses a woman based on whispers. Not in my palace." The nobles fell silent. Tari looked away. Mama Neka clenched her wrapper. And the 3 noble daughters who started it all exchanged nervous glances. Then the prince did something no one expected. He took Zena's hand, in front of everyone. The palace is not just walls and gold. It is built on justice, and today, justice stands beside me. And for the first time, Zena's silence broke, not into words, but tears, because someone had finally spoken loud enough to drown the lies. The palace had never been quieter than it was the day after the prince took Zena's hand. The noblewomen stayed in their chambers. Mama Neka had returned to the village in shame, dragging Tari behind her like a failed basket of lies. The Queen Mother, wise as ever, neither rebuked nor praised. She simply watched. And in the middle of it all, Zena remained still. No pride, no performance. She returned to the palace kitchen as if nothing had happened. She cooked for the guards. She served the old steward with shaking hands, and when asked if she wanted to speak to the prince again, she quietly shook her head. But Prince Toba was not finished. The banquet hall was filled once more, not with dancers or music, but with elders, advisors, and family. There, standing at the center with the royal seal in one hand and a plain clay pot in the other, the prince spoke words that would be remembered long after the firewood turned to ash. "This pot," he began, "did not just carry soup. It carried truth. It carried pain. It carried a girl who the world tried to silence, yet she spoke through flavor when words failed her." He turned to Zena, standing beside the Queen Mother. "Zena, daughter of no noble name, I ask you not just to remain in this palace, but to walk beside me, as the woman whose strength fed my spirit before I ever knew her face." Gasps, murmurs. The Queen Mother's lips curled into the faintest smile. Zena's hands trembled. "But I am not royal. You are honest," the Queen Mother replied. "And in this house, that is rarer than gold." And so on that day, in front of the village that once overlooked her, the palace that almost broke her, and the prince who truly saw her, Zena became not just a cook, but a crown bearer. Not because of her beauty, not because of her name, but because of a single pot of soup, stirred with truth, pain, and destiny. Moral of the story: sometimes, the very thing we do out of hunger or habit, quietly, humbly, may be the one thing that heaven uses to lift us beyond imagination. Never underestimate the power in your hands, even if all you're holding is a wooden spoon.